Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show.
His Dark Materials is the new modern classic TV show made by the BBC and HBO, retelling the classic story of His Dark Materials, the book series, by Philip Pullman. Episode 204, Tower of the Angels, finds Lee Scoresby and his rabbit on the river where they meet a bird demon, and that leads him to Grumman, who's now calling himself
Joppery.
And after sitting them down and having a cup of tea and a chat, he convinces him that it'll help find the knife bearer, but that actually might be a bit more dangerous for Lyra, since, he doesn't know who they are or what they're all about. Still, they end up getting back in Lee's balloon, and he does a kind of a magic whoosh in it with wind magic or something. Meanwhile, back in Oxford, bedraggled Mary Malone gets rudely awoken from an all-nighter desk nap by a surprise visit from Charles. Turns out he's actually a super keen investor, and Mary's pal is all about getting him to give them a bit of cash. But the second he mentions the dreaded words, defence contracts, she puts the kibosh on the whole meeting and sends him packing. And after which Mary decides to try the machine again, opening up her mind, and boom, suddenly it starts straight up just talking to her and says, yeah, by the way, we're angels, dust is made of angels, and shadows are involved as well, and shadows and dust and all that.
We mortals are but shadows and dust. Shadows and dust, Maximus!
Charles, on the other hand, is getting a wee bit miffed, so he bogs off back to the other London and calls up Mrs. C for some lunch. And she's back there suddenly, somehow, and is a bit surprised when he mentions that he's actually seen Lyra, and has her off getting something for him, and she agrees to go along with him to find her. Meanwhile, Lyra and Will are back in Sitigazi planning how to get into the Tower of the Angels, because there's not really a clear way in, but luckily, they go around the corner and find a door with a big angel on it, because subtlety is not this show's forte. So they kick the door in, and inside it's all kind of quirky and cool, but then they head upstairs. But then somebody else sneaks in behind them, and when they get up to the top they find Terence Stamp all tied up. Turns out that the laddie that's following them got inside first and has the knife. He starts attacking them and ends up slashing Will in the hand, and Will ends up using his boxing skills to kick the guy's butt and win, only he's now short a pair of fingers. And that's not as bad as it seems apparently, since the old man tells him, yep, that's what happens, and that means that you're now the knife bearer. But old man Rada gives him a huge long spiel about how Will can use the knife to cut through anything with one side, but in the other side he can use it to prise universes apart by finding strands and separating them. And also closing up these cuts again, because that's a good idea. And he tells them to sod off so that he can meet his doom in peace, necking a bit of poison before the shadows get to him. So they end up going for the other dot boy instead, so no worries. And it's round about this point that Mrs. C and Charles arrive in Sitigazi, and that she notices a shadow beastie, but doesn't seem too bothered. And Lyra and Will, on the other hand, they commiserate over his mangled hand, and Pan gets a wee bit friendly. Oh, and Seraphina and a couple of other witches do a giant single-handed takedown of an entire Magisterium fleet because, of course they can, and, why even worry about it? So what did I think? Well, I thought this was a bit of a slow episode. I mean, not a bad one per se, but just a bit slow. And in part, it kind of works because everything's now revolving around the fairly important central scene of Will getting the subtle knife. The Etimageddon or whatever it was called.
Also known as Asahetra.
Okay, which was kind of fun. And he even got in a wee fight with the boy off of A Monster Calls. No, really, seriously, watch A Monster Calls. It's an absolutely cracking movie. Just bring lots and lots of tissues. It's really sad. But also there's unexpected Terence Stamp. And he's looking a wee bit old these days, but he still carries it all off without really trying. Why everybody has English accents in a town where everybody has Italian names is, I don't know, a pretty standard BBC to be honest, but it seems a bit strange. But also, I absolutely loved that when we saw the lines of the world, they looked just like the lines in the Dust computer. And obviously it's the same lines that you're seeing in the intro sequence, because just like I said back in Season 1, this show is telling you an awful lot more than you realise by showing you the opening credits, if you know what to look for. And similarly, I like how, we got Charles and his creepy snake trying to wiggle out onto Mrs. C's hand, and her basically holding back her angry monkey. Fnair. Now contrast this with the scene with Pan and Lyra, where Will sort of reaches his fingers out and strokes like Pan's head, and notice that immediately, straight after that, Lyra sits down, not just beside Will, but practically inside his back pocket, because, right, if it's not clear, she clearly fancies the pants off him, which is really cute, because, they are just like little young innocent teenagers. But just to say, all of this connection between the demons and people fancying each other might be a little important later on. But also, we finally got to see Grumman, which, and he's got a demon somehow. Did he get that by crossing to Lyra's world, or through something else, or part of his shaman stuff? He just says, yeah, well, I got one, and it's like, oh, okay. And yeah, it was nice to see him. Good to see Moriarty off Sherlock doing something that wasn't totally embarrassing, or just being like a priest getting hit on. But yeah, I'm curious to see where they go with this character. But on the other hand, right, okay, there's something that happened this episode that's been bugging me a bit, and it's happened a couple of times, and I felt the need to bring it up. Right, when Will took Lyra to Oxford from City Gazi the first time, they actually came through exactly the same park where Charles has been entering from Lyra's world. But when Will arrived in City Gazi, he was actually in a totally different place. So are these doorways all supposed to be in the same park, right close to each other? And if so, what's to stop Lyra and Will from finding the one that goes to her Oxford? Because I mean, it seems like a really bad bit of continuity on the show's part that all these things are in exactly the same place. And we see like this week that Charles takes Mrs. Coulter to City Gazi. I mean, I assumed that they were going to go to his house in real Oxford to wait, but instead they end up going to like the city full of evil shadow demons, which seems a bit nuts to be honest. But considering the way this show is going, I imagine it's all going to fall together that he's going to do something really stupid because his brain's all about how hot Mrs. C is and she's going to like screw him over. Because I'm just calling it. I don't remember if that happens in the book. I don't even remember her and Charles meeting in the book. So I'm pretty sure that this is something new. But yeah, it worries me. It also brings up a load of questions like, if he knew that there was a gate there, then why hasn't he already gone and gotten the knife himself, since he plainly knew about it before Azrael opened the skybeam and let all the shades out? So how many doorways and portals are there in that park? And is it ever going to actually make sense of any of this? I'm guessing not. There's also a big issue this week with time passage and people just zipping about. I mean, we're back to the old people magically teleporting around the map, and I mean, it was long enough for Mrs. Coulter to travel all the way from wherever it was up north where she met Lee last week to suddenly she's back in London again because it's convenient. And at the same time, that all happened probably in the same amount of time as Lee travelling along the river, hanging out with Grumman and then heading back upriver to where it was he had his airship. Now, that might not have been that far, but it just seems a bit odd. And yet, the same thing, Lyra and Will, they seem to have basically spent maybe an afternoon and part of the early evening since the previous episode. I mean, it's not a deal breaker, it just feels messy, especially since they're trying to tie together these characters and these different storylines in ways that I don't think happened in the book. I mean, I'm pretty sure that in making it do that, we're giving ourselves a bit of a Game of Thrones problem here, where suddenly people are just where the plot needs them to be, even if it makes absolutely no sense. I mean, it would have made much more sense if Mrs. C had never gone up and met Lee Scoresby, but they had to have that scene. Another thing was the inevitable witch retaliation scene, and okay, here's my issue. Now, okay, you've opened war against magical flying ninja women, so you presumably would expect that the troops have some idea of what they're up against, and wouldn't just look around vacantly and say,
"There's something out there."
You would be waiting because you know as soon as they arrive, they're going to do serious damage. It's a ship. Give a compass direction or say, oh, they're off the port bow or something like that. I mean, these are supposed to be sailors or soldiers or aircraftmen or something. I mean, also when they're firing, not a single one of them leads a target. They all just fire and go, oh, it's moved, oh, it's moved, oh, it's moved. And then she busts the door down, just stands there looking very TV, and nobody shoots until after she's gone into her magic whoosh. I mean, again, this happens on a lot of shows. It's very silly, it's quite standard, but it's also really naff. And there's also a point here where she literally gets shot in the face and it doesn't seem to matter. So, I mean, I know that's, you know, it's probably just the cutting there. It was supposed to not look like it was hitting her in the face, but yeah, anyway. I mean, it could be worse. It could be the farcical gunfights on Westworld, but it just makes a mockery of the idea of the Magisterium declaring war on witches. I mean, stuff like that made more sense in the book where you never actually saw it and they just alluded to stuff happening. But now we're literally being shown it, and the whole concept is so unbalanced, it's just ridiculous. But again, on the whole, it's not boring. I mean, the story's going places, and literally the knife scene is pretty much the last thing I remember from the books, although I'm pretty sure I also remember there was some gag in the book about the old man giving Will a tube of Savalon or something, and I guess they cut that because, to be honest, it added nothing to the show other than to show that things from one world that seem mystical and important might just be pretty common in every day in the other worlds, but yeah. But on that note, till next time. But that's all I've really got to say, so till next time, I've been Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions. And a special thanks to everybody listening, and especially my patrons, and most especially to Michelle Forbes and Judith Coloma, my top tier patrons. Thank you everybody. Everybody stay safe. Cheerio.